Zhang Huan. Yeah. One of the earliest, most well-known performance artists in China. Again, it's an artist who's gone on to do other things since, not just stuck with performance art. But it already has some of that kind of extreme quality in a certain Western performance art. This is one where he's using his own body. There are other works where he's using other people's body, or a group of people's body come together. 12 meters square refers to the size of the place in which he's performing. It's a public toilet in the so-called artist village that he's living in at that time. It's this kind of self-created artist community of, I think, really for artists who didn't have proper residence permits in Beijing. One of the first kind of creations of a specific space for an unofficial artist community. Now completely gone, and they named it themselves as the East Village or whatever. So he's covered himself, I think, with honey and fish oil, if I remember correctly. It's a sort of collection of things that are likely to attract flies, and indeed did so. So it's a deliberate sort of self-abjection, kind of reducing of your own body, but at the same time sort of resistance or sort of endurance, showing that you can put up with it. And there happened to be one of his friends was a very good photographer, so there were these very high quality photos which are not necessarily always available. They're just really rather well done by Rong. And that sort of captures our image of the performance, I think. The better the photos, the more those photos become the iconic kind of image of the performance. There's some video as well. In the end, he walks out into a kind of pond. You could sort of say that as a sort of cleansing moment. I don't think the pond was very clean, but anyway, it's a sort of baptismal kind of cleansing kind of end to the performance. Gives it a certain kind of scripted quality to it. Yeah, so here you see all of these. He's actually underwater by the end of it. Gets rid of the flies. Ma Liu Ming. So he had this sort of very feminine look that he cultivated and created this sort of androgynous body. In one photo there you see him looking very female, almost like a sort of cross-dressing quality. But then he also performed naked, so he emphasized then his biological maleness, created more kind of ambiguity of the persona he's performing. So this is exactly the kind of performance work that made the authorities rather wary of performance art. And he actually is one of those who was arrested. He spent time behind bars for a while because of his work. Eventually he stopped doing these performances because he felt his body was aging. He couldn't perform this identity of fun Ma Liu Ming, his kind of other alter ego, that female alter ego. So all these kind of gender issues, which of course would be very hard to talk about in Chinese art up to that time. You get very, in officially approved art, you get very sort of stereotypical male and female roles, and always very positive and defined images of what men and women should be and do. So this is the beginning of that breaking down. Songdong. By contrast, I mean, there is a sort of endurance dimension here, but by contrast to Zhang Huan, it's more of a very light activity. It's a two-part work. One evening and then the next morning in two sites in Beijing. This, of course, is Tiananmen Square, right in the sort of ceremonial heart of the city. This is Harvey, not that far away, a kind of lake that's at that time of year frozen. Actually, what happened was not what he was expecting to happen entirely. So he just lying down on the ground and then breathing. Breathing is the main activity, so it was simple bodily engagement with the site. And of course, a lot of the meaning of the work comes from it being a very symbolically loaded site. Symbolically loaded because it's a sort of the ceremonial heart of the capital city, with Tiananmen behind, and deliberately created as such, but all the architecture and the monuments to the people's heroes and everything that is on that site, but then overloaded beyond that with more troubling associations because of all the things that happened in that site, which are not scripted as part of the state's narrative, and of course especially the bloodshed of June 1989. So coming in the middle of the 1990s, those memories are very raw, so even to do something very simple like this is a little bit difficult. 40 minutes on the ground in sub-zero temperature, so his warm breath freezing to create a little pattern of ice on the ground over that period of time. He likes very much doing very temporary things, very small temporary things. Like one work is using a kind of seal and stamping the seal on a river. Of course, the seal will make an impression, but only a very temporary one, and then it will all flow away. I think that relates partly to his interest in Taoist philosophy, and the ever-changingness of everything, and the need to accept that and not kind of fight against it. I talked to him about this work, and he told me when he was a child, he'd like in the cold weather to kind of breathe onto the cold window on the inside and see his breath there, So it's a sort of childhood association apart from anything else. Then the idea was to come back to this for the second part of the work to another site, and daytime instead of nighttime. And what he thought he was going to do was to use his breath to melt the ice, but actually that didn't really happen that way. Policemen came up to him while he was there, of course, and he was able to get away with it by saying, well, he's a teacher doing a project with his students, and they let him carry on. And now I think you'd have no chance to do anything like this in Tiananmen Square. Now it's even more police space. At that point in time, you couldn't take video in Tiananmen Square. So there's no video of this performance. There's just some photos that his students took. He was working in a teacher training college, I suppose art teacher training, and his students were there to sort of help him. And I think they also made a sound recording. He said that. but I've never heard that sound recording. He likes to do things with water, so this playing with ice and freezing is all part of that story. He has a project of making a diary where he writes in water with a calligraphy brush on a slab. So it's a very private diary that just sort of disappears. It's somehow saying it's the writing of the diary rather than the record that's important. Here is that work of the printing on water, 1996 also. So the seal he's printing with has the character for water written on it, so it's printing water on water, if you like. And the seal, of course, it will have the association with a state authority, like a big seal of Qinlong or someone. But it's almost about the impossibility of control. The seal can't leave its mark. And this is the river is in Tibet, and of course Tibet has this sort of slightly marginal status, and is a kind of like Hong Kong or Xinjiang, is a kind of dangerous region where people might not feel happy about state authority. So doing it there brings up those issues to some extent. Now, if you go to Lhasa, you go to the museum in Lhasa, the first room is a room full of Chinese seals, big seals. And because the point of it is to say, look, this proves that Tibet always was under Chinese rule, because here's the seals of the people who ruled it or whatever. So, the issue of seals comes up. Actually, I think that room full of seals on that museum was not there when he did this work, but I'm trying to say, that's the sort of issue that comes up. So it's a sort of Taoistic idea: the weak overcomes the strong. That water is in the Tao Te Ching. Water is stronger by taking the lower position. By yielding, you become strong. So it's a sort of Taoistic idea. I was staying with some Chinese examples. Sun Yuan and Peng Yu, Civilization Pillar, 2001. So this is human body fat arranged as a pillar. The body fat comes from liposuction, kind of clinics or whatever, where they take fat out of bodies of people who feel they're too obese or something. It's very unsettling, the idea of, it brings up associations like to what the Nazis did in death camps and that, using human bodies to make soap and things like that. Well, but then it could, the body is, of course, this is just to make, this is Jake and Dinos Chapman, Great Deeds Against the Dead, just to make the point that body art is everywhere, of course. It's not just in when you're actually using the body. It could be that you're just representing the body. So it's not a completely different category from what has already been there in our. Here, what they're doing is remaking in 3D a scene in a Goya etching of the disasters of war. Somehow it becomes more horrific if you turn it into a kind of waxworks tableau or something. Or Ubermensch, Superman, that would be 1995. Stephen Hawkins. Because of his illness, it's almost like he represents the human mind almost detached from the body or something like that. One more British artist, Marcus Harvey, one of the sort of young British artists group, and his work Myra of 1995. I think this is an example of it's a painting. This would be an example of something that would have a lot of meaning in a British context, but maybe it doesn't have a meaning anywhere else in quite the same way. It's a portrait of someone who was convicted of cold-blooded murder of a whole series of children. There's a very, very famous thing in Britain, but probably almost unknown anywhere else, called the Moors murders. In fact, it wasn't her who did the killing, it was her boyfriend. She was kind of an accomplice. She knew what was going on, but she didn't stop it. So it is in a British context, it's a truly horrific example of cruelty, because there were tape recordings and everything that were made of the suffering of the children before they were killed, you know. And everyone would know this photo because it's a sort of police photo, isn't it? You know, this frontal photo, like the kind of photos police take when they arrest someone. But people would know it as a press photo. It would have appeared many, many times in the press, and it's perhaps in a way the press became more obsessed with her than with the man who did it, because, you know, women are supposed to be kind and not to be cold-blooded in quite the same way. So it sort of breaks with all stereotypes we have about women. Well, he made a cast of an infant's hand. It was children that were the victims of this crime, and used that cast of the hand to make the image of, you know, white, black, grey. So it's sort of made indirectly by an infant's body, you could say, to create a mimicry of that press photo. And this was, of course, very shocking. It was shown in the show called Sensation in the Royal Academy in London in 1997, I think. The show where the young British artists really sort of came to light. And it's quite a large painting, 9 foot by 11 foot. And there was a sort of predictable media outrage about it. One of the families of one of the victims asked for it to be taken out of the exhibition, and even the woman herself, Myra Hindley, she wrote from prison saying, "Please take it away, you know, because it would cause upset to the families," or whatever. But it wasn't. It was kept there. I think some artists resigned from the Royal Academy, like Gillian Ayres, the abstract painter, resigned. Although I've noticed that her work is still always in the annual summer exhibition, so maybe she rejoined later or changed her mind or something. So I think all this was to some extent intended, but certainly easy to predict that it would happen, that kind of context. But I think it's a defensible work in the sense that it's trying to, you know, to bring these issues up and arguably talk about how these things become already, you know, the media have dealt with all these issues. We're so familiar with the image in the British context because the media has been showing it so many times. Why is that okay, but it's not okay to include it in an art exhibition? Maybe it's just to do with people's preconceptions about what art should be. So let's move on to think about conceptual art, which is another of the headings I want to use. Maybe this is a sort of tendency in art from the middle of the 1960s. And again, I'm going to look at conceptual art and some more recent art of a similar vein. Sometimes people make the distinction between conceptual art and conceptualism, or neo-conceptualism, sometimes people say. And as well as conceptual art, sometimes originally, before that term became dominant, people used other terms like post-object art or art as idea. And like all these different isms, all these different movements and titles, it's a label that covers actually quite a variety of different things that may be motivated by different, have different motivations. But it's all part of this sort of breakdown of the formalist project. It's a movement away from the concern with paint quality or forms in themselves, a rejection of that kind of physical craft or even visual quality of art towards the idea of the idea being the important thing. Now you could say that that there are precursors for this, so that whole notion of idealist philosophy as applied in aesthetics in the 19th century would be people like Croce, that say the idea is the essential thing, not the manual execution. So it's people from an art world falling in love with certain trends in philosophy in a way. That's part of it, especially sort of Wittgenstein and linguistic philosophy. It's not so much theorists coming to look at art as artists coming to take on theoretical or philosophical tasks themselves, at least to the extent that they feel able to do so. What they produced in their conceptual art may seem very philosophical in an artwork context, but in the context of philosophy it would probably not seem very rigorous, and not a contribution to that discourse really. All the way through modernism there is a sort of a kind of critique of notions of pure vision, the breakdown of realism, of mimetic art with Cézanne and Cubism. It's partly a kind of a sense of the vision can't dominate the world, or art can't represent visual reality in all its detail. So it's sort of a continuation of that tendency, you could say. I'd also want to explain it as art from a kind of art school generation, artists who are earning their living teaching art. They have jobs in academic institutions, so it's kind of not too unusual to imagine that they become more theoretic in their approach, their way of thinking, as opposed to artists from a kind of bohemian environment. It's not altogether a breaking down of the power of the artist, though. In a way, it's a sort of attempt to increase the power of the artist. Douglas Herbler, for example, says, "What I say is part of my work. I don't look to critics to say things about my work. I tell them what it's about." So it's the art. It's the act of nomination by the artists themselves decides whether something is a work of art. But that's a sort of attempt to increase the artist's power. Let's find another example. Yeah, for example, Robert Morris, we met him under the heading of minimalism, but you could also talk about him here. He created one piece in 1963 called Document, Statement of Aesthetic Withdrawal. He went before a public notary, that is a sort of like someone who can witness legal documents officially. He signed a document there, notarized the document, saying Statement of Aesthetic Withdrawal. The undersigned, Robert Morris, being the maker of the metal construction entitled Litanies, described in the annexed Exhibit A, hereby withdraws from said construction all aesthetic quality and content, and declares that from the date hereof said construction has no such quality and content, dated blah 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 blah. So it's like saying, I like Duchamp could say something is a work of art by making it saying it is a work of art. It is a work of art. But I can also do the reverse. I can say it's not a work of art, and I can say take away all the aesthetic qualities. So there's still a lot of power in the hand of the artist, maybe more than the artist actually has to control people's responses. Another example like that would be Robert Rauschenberg. He was asked to submit a work for an exhibition. I think it may have been a portrait exhibition. Anyway, he sent a telegram saying, this is a portrait of Iris Clert, if I say so. So that's just purely textual work. Iris Clert is the gallery owner, by the way. So something about how the work of art is a work of art because it's defined as such. Putting a urinal in an art gallery is what makes it a work of art. Of course, it has its roots in Duchamp, who I've already mentioned, and Dada more generally. There's already that kind of anti-retin or anti-materials technique side to Duchamp. It's the idea that makes it the art, not the type of object it is. And Duchamp was really very popular again in the 1960s, many artists looking at his work. He's living in New York. Let's look at some examples. Joseph Kosuth, so titled Art as Idea, Meaning, 1967. So in this case, it's the meaning of meaning which is being looked at. So just presenting a dictionary definition. Instead of a thing, we have words that describe a thing. And there are other ones he did at this time which have other words like water, for instance. Or he would present an object and the definition. So a complete rejection of visual pleasure. wrote a sort of manifesto in 1969, published in Studio International, called Art After Philosophy. Being an artist, he says, now means to question the nature of art. So the role of art is to be about what art is, to define what art is. It's a sort of meta-discourse. Mel Bochner. He's interested in what you might call serialism, looking at sequences of things. He'll explain all the different possible combinations, so yeah, some are not in, some are in, all are in. We'll look at going through all the different possible. It's the idea, it sort of pre-exists in its totality and then is actualized visually. I guess you could say there's something like that in Frank Stella too, where you have a predetermined format and then he explores different possibilities of it. Or even Rothko defining basically his format in advance and then explore the different possibilities. But this is something carried pretty much to an extreme in a way. Manzoni we've met before. I can put him in this category too, though. When we saw his living sculpture as a kind of body art, but you could see it as conceptual art too, designating a person to be art, issuing a certificate to say that this person is an art, or by signing their body, or by saying that they are a work of art at certain times, for example, when they're asleep. Here, it's the artist's breath. Oh yeah, I could have put this under body art if I wanted to. It's a little bit like I could have put it next to the Song Dong, for example. Could relate it also to Duchamp. He took some air of Paris and put it trapped it in a glass container, sent that to America to his patron. And this is how it looks now. So it's deflated and shriveled away over time. So we get the sense of, and of course he himself is gone too. He's dead. So. The sense of transience is there. Becomes a relic of him in a way. This is the work by the English Art and Language Group. They're on both sides of the Atlantic. This was going on, this kind of conceptual turn in art. Art and Language are famous for having a magazine where they, instead of producing artworks that go on the wall of galleries, they were writing things and it would go into a magazine. Art and Language is the name of the magazine. So all kinds of philosophical engagement. So when they were asked to produce something for the Documenta exhibition in Kassel, this Documenta 5 in 1972, they produced this work, Index 01, which is just sort of bringing together all their different publications in a filing system. So it's typical of conceptual art, of deliberately sort of refusing any kind of visual interest. So visual pleasure is seen as somehow a reduction of the intellectual engagement. Can only really be understood as a reaction against the extreme concern for formal visual qualities in works like that of Frank Stella. yeah, so this is one of the first issues of art language. So you can see that artist Joseph Kosuth, the American, was the American correspondent, the American editor for a while. The people involved changed over time. There's quite a lot of people involved. I would say of the main people involved here, Michael Baldwin remains important, and Mel Ramsden remains important. They become the main figures in later year, along with an art historian who kind of got involved with them, Charles Harrison. So this is Mel Ramsden under his own name. Secret Painting, 1967 to 8. So again, it's a sort of meta statement, art about art. And it's the artist sort of claiming the power of deciding the content of their art, which is questionable, you know, how much the artist can control meaning. The content of this painting is invisible. The character and dimensions of the content are to be kept permanently secret, known only to the artist. That implies there is an actual content which the artist knows. You know, I mean, can content be controlled by one person like that? Isn't meaning a kind of transaction? We make meaning from a work of art, so we have a power, not just the artist. So it's strangely concerned with the artist controlling interpretation in relation to the spectator or in relation to critical writing. So it's a sort of play with monochrome painting, you know. There are many monochrome paintings of this time, but this one is taken as sort of having its meaning hidden away somewhere. LeWitt 1, 2, 3 of 1978. It's a little bit like the Mel Bochner, in you know you have a sort of a sequence explored. I could have looked at him under minimalism in a way. I think he could have fitted in there quite nicely, but I decided to use him here instead. Just one or two things he says might be interesting to read. The idea becomes a machine that makes the art. You know, the idea is the important thing. And the idea should be sort of fixed in advance, and then when you make the artwork, actually it could be someone else makes it for you. No changes should be there along the way. He says if the artist changes his mind midway through the execution of the piece, he compromises the result and repeats past results. I'm emphasizing the maleness of his assumption there. Once the idea of the piece is established in the artist's mind and the final form is decided, the process is carried out blindly. The idea itself, even if not made visible, is as much a work of art as any finished product. The form itself is of very limited importance. It becomes the grammar for the total work. Three-part set 789B, 1968. Yeah, you can sort of sense the rule that has led to the actualization of the work, that the rule kind of pre-existed the work. So he's foregoing the possibility of a feedback loop from the actual manual construction, that you could actually change your idea while you're doing it. But arguably that's one of the advantages that art has over some other processes, that you can, by doing something, you can learn. But he's choosing to separate those two things out. So it could be another person that creates the artwork, actualizes the artwork. So, for example, he does a lot of these wall drawings, and the wall drawings could be executed in a completely different location by another person on his behalf, just following a set of rules to produce the drawing. They almost can look like mathematical models in a museum or something like that, but as an art historian called Rosalind Krauss pointed out, he tends to explain all the different possibility in a way that a mathematician wouldn't. The economy of mathematical language is replaced by what she calls a sort of loquaciousness of explaining all the different possibilities, almost like a child will not be able to summarize it, say, and then we did this, and then we did that, and then we did that, and then we did that, kind of and. I think we should stop there.